If you want to follow along in your Bibles, I'll be reading from Matthew 26:47 through 56. And while he was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, with a great multitude with swords and clubs, came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now his betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him." Immediately he went up to Jesus and said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. But Jesus said to him, "Friend, why have you come?" Then they came and laid hands on Jesus and took him. And suddenly one of those who were with Jesus stretched out his hand and drew his sword, struck the servant of the high priest, and cut off his ear. But Jesus said to him, "Put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he will provide me with more than 12 legions of angels? How then could the scriptures be fulfilled, that it must happen thus?" And that hour Jesus said to the multitudes, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and clubs to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and you did not seize me. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples forsook him and fled.
I thank Tanner for doing those readings there. The idea that I want you to think about this morning is living in a world where we're treated unfairly. You know, a lot of us talks about being treated unfairly in this old world. A lot of us think that this world should be more fair. You know, sometimes we just can't seem to understand that really in this life, in this side of eternity, in this old world, we're not going to always be treated fairly. What I wanted you to understand about the reading of these verses was, do you believe that Jesus was treated fairly here just before he is put to death on the cross? Here was Judas, the one that was going to betray him. He comes up as a friend would in their day and time and by their custom, and would kiss him on the jaw. But that was the sign that he was the one that they were seeking for. And when he did that, immediately they take hold of Jesus. Do you think Jesus knew what Judas was doing? Well, just remember, just before that, as they were eating together, Jesus said to Judas, "What thou must do, do it quickly." So Jesus knew that Judas was going to betray him. Probably without doubt knew that the kiss was the signal. How could you imagine if that would have happened to one of us, how that we would feel about that? We would feel, and of course this is what Judas did. He betrayed the Lord. Well, we would feel the same way, and we would feel that we've been treated so unfairly in this. Matter of fact, Peter evidently thought this was unfair and unjust because he drew his sword and smote the ear off in the servant. But then Jesus tells him to put up his sword, that, you know, if I wanted vengeance here, if vengeance was what I was after, because I've been treated unfairly, I could call to the Father and he'd provide me legions of angels here. But that was not what it was about. This was just not what it was about. So I want you to think about this lesson as we go through this lesson this morning. When I am unfairly treated, how should I react and what should be my attitude? And when we think about that, look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 16. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. Now what Ecclesiastes is teaching us and wanting us to see here is that wickedness takes the place of justice in a lot of cases. And that wickedness will take the place of righteousness in a lot of cases. He's just simply saying, look, in this world, not everything is just, and not everything is righteous. And you know, sometimes we as Christians, we think that we should always be treated and we should just, have everything just perfect. I tell you the way some people's attitude is when I obey the gospel that God ought to just shroud me with a glass bubble that nothing should be able to ever touch me. And that every man should treat me fairly and just because simply of that. But that's not the case. That's not the case. This life is not always fair. Look at Acts chapter 5. We've been studying in Acts, so this should be sort of fresh on our mind. And when they heard this, they were furious and plotted to kill them. Then one of the council stood up, a Pharisee named Gamaliel. Now this was with Peter and John and him. A teacher of the law, held in respect by all the people, and commanded them to put the apostles out for a little while. And he said unto them, Men of Israel, take heed to yourself what you intend to do regarding these men. Was the apostles sure being treated fairly? No, they were not. Matter of fact, they were treated unjust in every way. So this one teacher here, this Gamaliel, he puts some space between the apostles and them, and he warns them, take heed to what you're fixing to do to these men. You need to realize that life is not fair here, and when we look at these people's lives, we can see that these people, though of what they could do, the miracles that they could do, the signs and wonders that they could do, these men healed a crippled man, and they all knew it. But yet, this did not cause the public to treat them with respect. They were treated with disgrace. They were belittled. They were even punished for the things in which they would do. Verse 36 here says, For some time ago Thaddeus arose, claiming to be somebody. Now he's given some illustrations of people before these apostles and what had happened to them. Here was this Thaddeus, as he says. He arose claiming to be somebody. In other words, claiming to be somebody other than who he was. Now, first of all, the apostles was not claiming to be anybody other than who they actually were. But this man was claiming to be some great power here, without a doubt. But the apostles wasn't claiming to have this great power. They was actually demonstrating, showing these great powers. Now, we talked about Simon a little bit this morning, and it was pointed out about Simon, the sorcerer, we find in chapter 8, that he was a sorcerer. He used trickery, the sleight of hands, to bewitch people. But the apostles did not use that. Even Simon, as Roger pointed out so plainly this morning, Simon knew the difference between the sleight of hand or a magic trick than the real thing. That's simply why he wanted to purchase that. because he's seen it to be the real thing. If I have that, I can do the real thing. So these apostles was not claiming to be. They were demonstrating that they were the power of God. Now he goes on and says, now this man, he had about 400 that joined him. He was slain, and all who obeyed him were scattered and came to naught. Nothing. It just came to naught. It was nothing more about it. That just ended that. After this man was Judas of Galilee rose up in the days of the census. And he drew away people after him. And he also perished, and all who obeyed him were dispersed or dispersed. In other words, they're gone. It come to no good. It ended up. That ended it. So what he's saying to them, look, these people, just leave them alone. Don't mistreat them, and don't do these things to them, because, as he's going to point out, now I say unto you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this work is of man, it will come to nothing. But if it be of God, you cannot overthrow it, lest even be found to fight against God. Even with this advice to the council that these guys were facing, the Sanhedrin court, that this man was smart enough to understand that, look, if this work is of God, we can't stop it. But if it's just these men, they're going to be just like these other men. It's just going to go away. It's just going to slowly vanish away when something happens. But with this advice, did this stop them from treating these men unfairly? No. They take these men and they tell them, don't be preaching, don't be teaching in this name. Don't be bringing this man's death upon us. You see, life is not always fair. No matter how much good you want to do in life, it's not always fair. Here was men that were doing good things. The man that sat at the gate of Beautiful had been paralyzed from his birth. They healed him. And these men didn't like that. And they were actually treated unfair because of all what they did. And these guys admitted with themselves that, look, that this is a noble miracle. This is a miracle. What we're looking at is a miracle. But did that change the attitude of these people to make them want to treat these people more fairly? No, it did not. Now, sometimes in life, me and you get the same idea. We come with the same thing. That who we are, that we think that we ought to be given a square deal by everybody all the time, anywhere, anyhow, no way around it. But that's not always the case. Yet when we're treated unfairly, we need to think back to Jesus himself, the Savior, the Messiah, and think about how people treated him and how that he suffered for us unfairly. Matter of fact, the Bible says the just for the unjust. That's who Jesus was. He was the just who suffered for the unjust, which is us. He suffered because he wanted to bring salvation to us. The apostles were treated unfairly simply because they wanted to spread the word, the gospel of Jesus Christ, to all the world and give everybody an opportunity to obey that gospel. And yet they, in their life, was treated unfairly. You think about that as the lesson goes on. God will finally balance all the accounts. Someday God is going to balance all the accounts of our lives. He's going to balance that. He's going to make that right. And that's something that me and you need to think about. Think about this. What happens in me is more important than what happens to me. You know, think about Jesus here. He's in the garden. Here comes a friend. He has sold him for a lousy 30 pieces of silver. He brings the men out to Jesus. He betrays him with a kiss, and they take hold on him. Now you think at this position here, and you, as Roger says, you put us out of this building and put us back at this time. Here was Jesus who led this mob to Jesus, or Judas who led this mob to Jesus. And they're going to take him away, and they're taking him away to put him on trial and to kill him. They're going to set up false witness. They're going to put him to death. And Peter jerks his sword and was going to fight. And Jesus just said, put up your sword. My kingdom's not of this world. It's not of this world. You know, Jesus could have had indignation in him there and said, we will fight. You see, what happens in me is more important than what happens to me. You know, Jesus is saying, look, I'm here for this purpose. This is my end. I don't want to fight. My purpose is not to fight. And the purpose of his followers was not to fight neither. So I have to say the same thing. It's more important what happens in me than what happens to me. And if we can get that down and get that right, we'll be a lot better people to serve God. Now, have I got this down without problems? No, sir. And I would challenge anybody that says that they do. It's not a good thing when we're mistreated because we're trying to do what's right. It's not an easy thing. Peter shows that by cutting off the servant's ear. It's not always easy trying to do the right thing. Look at James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect works, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Now look, we're all going to have temptation. We're all going to fall into situations where we're tempted. But here he says, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into these various trials. Because this various trials is a test of your faith. And that testing of that faith, he says, it'll produce patience. You see, the things that's going on around me is happening to me. But that patient building is taking place in me. You know, many years ago, my mother-in-law, she'd always tell me, she said, I can tell the very minute you get mad by your expression. And she told me that one time, and I said, did I do anything? She said, well, no. I said, did I act out of the way? And she said, well, no. I said, well, okay. Okay, that may have happened to me, may have sparked the temper. But what happened in me? How did I react to it? Now, have I always reacted in a good way? No, I have not. No, I have not. But it has to do with what's in a man. It has to do with what's there. And that's what James is talking about. We're going to fall to these trials. We're going to fall into them. And these trials is going to test our faith. And that faith needs to produce patience. That's what's going on within that person. Now he says, but let patience have its perfect works. Let it be complete, that you be perfect. Now, this don't mean that you're going to be without sins, but it means that you're going to grow and to perfect yourself. And you're going to lack nothing. In other words, you're going to get self-control. And self-control has to start within. So remember, it's not what's happening to you out here, it's what's going on in here. It's what's going on within a man. Look at Genesis chapter 50 and verse 19 through 20 here. This is with Joseph, a story that we all should know pretty well. Been taught that many years down through the years. We know that Joseph was sold by his brethren into slavery because they were jealous of him, and some of the remarks that Joseph made sort of helped aid his dad on, and so they decided to get rid of him, so they sell him. Now he goes down into Egypt, and there he stays many years, and finally there comes a great famine, and his dad has to send his brother down there because they'd heard that there was grain there. So when you see this pick up right here, it says, Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? What did Joseph mean about that statement? Am I in the place of God? Simply, Joseph is saying, it's not in my place to punish you. That's God's doing. That's God's part right there. It's not for me to do that. Punishing belongs to God. Verse 20 says, but as for you, you meant evil against me. But God meant it for good in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people's lives. You see, it's not what happened to Joseph, but it's what is within Joseph. And if you notice what is within Joseph, that he realizes that it's not for him to punish his brother. It was not for him, and though he stood in a position that he could have had these brethren killed, all he'd had to do was say, away with them, and he could have had them locked up. Matter of fact, he does get them locked up for a while, especially the younger son. He keeps him. That way he brings everybody down. But look at it. Joseph understood that his brethren meant evil. Their intentions were evil. Now you think about his situation. Do you believe he was treated fairly? By his own brother? No, he was not. Joseph recognized that they meant him evil. They meant harm and hurt to him. They bring harm and hurt to their father. You remember what the father says when they go back with that coat and they lay it down after dousing it with blood? And they tell him, some animals probably ate him up. And he said, I'll go to my grave a mourning this son's death. You see, in this man, they caused a very grief for several years. That man, their dad, lived many years of thinking that son was dead. But yet he comes to Egypt and he finds out that son's been alive all along. You see the harm and the unfairness of all of that. But with Joseph, he says, it's not my place to bring you harm or to hurt you, even though you meant that for me. In a world that we live in that is unfair in every way, we're unfairly treated. We need to understand that we're not in God's stead to take vengeance. You can see with Joseph, just like we said, that God would square the account. Now he's squaring this account. But this is what Joseph understood about this. that they meant him harm, but God meant it for good. This was the way that God had fixed that he would save his people. So that's the ideal that sometimes me and you have to look at, is that God is watching us to see how and what we will do in this kind of a situation. And I want you to think about that. Think about it. When Peter says this, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 19, down through about 20 here. For this is commendable if because of conscience toward God, one endures grief, suffering, wrongful. We suffer wrongfully. Now, he says this is commendable to God. Now, just like Joseph, as we pointed out, he suffered this evil. He suffered that. And yet it was wrongful in the way that they treated him. But look at him. It was commendable. Look at his life and look what took place in his life. How that he was second to Pharaoh. That God took care of him. Yeah, did he hit some rough spots in that? Yes, he did. He ended up in prison. He stayed in prison for a few years. But unfairly treated. But nevertheless, he did not give up on God. Now, verse 20 says, for what credit is it if, when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable for God. Here's the thing about it is, if we've done something wrong and we punished for it, then, he says, you bear that. But if we are doing good and we have to suffer this, it's not so easy to bear. And he said, look, you got to look at this. When he talks about commendable, he says thanksworthy, acceptable. The Revised does. If a man suffers wrong for conscience sake, God notes his suffering and approves of his conduct. Is what that's talking about. His conduct. How that he handles it. He handles it in a way that is pleasing to God. Yes, are we going to suffer wrong in this old world? Yes, we are. Is God going to take care of us in this old world? Yes, he will. For what glory is it to bear patience when we're punished for our faults? There's really no glory there. We could say like the thief on the cross, we justly get what we deserve. But when we have to bear this patiently and this suffering when doing wrong, and we're inflicted because we're doing what's right, then this is approved of God. You take Peter and John. Were they not beaten? And they walk away thanking God that God count them worthy, that they could suffer for his name. Think about the Apostle Paul. How much did he suffer in life? He was beaten, he was stoned, he was shipwrecked. I mean, you just think about that. You could look at Paul's life and you could say, oh my goodness, this person is totally treated unfair. Well, he was. But yet he never did give up on God. God is watching us. God's watching you. God's watching me. And he's keeping an eye on us. I must not give in to bitterness. Now this is what Satan wants. This is what the world wants. When we're treated unfairly, we sometimes want to give in. And we want to become bitter. And we want to become vengeful. We sometimes want to take vengeance into our own hand. I want you to think about this. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31 through 32. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamoring, and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. Verse 32 says, be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ has forgiven us. We must not give in to bitterness. And that's what Satan wants us to do, because when bitterness is there, it's going to bring about the wrath and the anger and the clamor and the evil speaking. That's what bitterness does to us. Look at Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14, 15. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Look carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up causes trouble. And by this many become defiled. So we can't give in to bitterness, but yet Satan wants us to do that. I must not return wrong for wrong. I can't do that. Look at what Matthew says. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38 through 39. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You think about that. You find those laws in Leviticus chapter 24, Deuteronomy 19 to 21. And the thing about it is, here is the plain sense is you give back as much injury as you get. That's the ideal here. And you know, we could make a logical take a logical look at this and say it like this right here. If this law stood true today, you would probably have better citizens. What's wrong with their laws today is people can do injury to you and our government does a slap on the hand to them. But when you got laws like this, people would be more careful about trying to gouge your eye out, because they would know that they would have to forfeit theirs. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whosoever slap you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. I've had people to say about that, well, he don't say what to do after they slap the second cheek. Well, Jesus is teaching another law. His law today is this. You don't render to people evil for evil. You don't do to them what they would do to you. And if they do slap you on the one cheek, you turn also the other. Look at Romans chapter 12, verse 17 through 19. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regards for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceable with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourself, but rather give peace to the wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Now you remember we started out by saying that God would settle the account. So the Bible is teaching me, Billy, you're going to be treated unfairly in this old world. People are not going to treat you with the uttermost respect. But you can't go off and render evil for evil. You can't return wrong for wrong. Again, how the attitude that Joseph had. I'm not in God's stead. It is for God to judge, and it is for God to repay. And that's the attitude that me and you need to have when we're treated unfairly in this old world. And you're certainly going to be just that. I wish we did live in a world where everybody was equal in the eyes of all mankind, where everybody was treated fairly. But that's just not possible. It's just not going to be. Romans chapter 12, verse 21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Here's the thing about this verse that we need to understand. You know, when you got your enemy and you got him under your feet, you've got him beaten. You've got him in a submissive place because you've overcome him by force. How long will he stay there? Until he gets strong enough to fight back. But if you overcome him with good, you have truly conquered. You have truly conquered that person. Because when you overcome him by good, you've not got him restrained in any way. He's free to make any move he wants to make, but he won't make that because of the good that you have done for him or for them. So we've got to think about that. Think about this in Luke chapter 9, verse 51 through 56. And as we do this here, we'll start coming to the close of this lesson. But think about it. Now it came to pass when the time had come for him to be received up, that he steadfast set his face to go to Jerusalem. Now this is Jesus. He knows that his time on earth is coming close. It's short, because he knows that when he goes up to Jerusalem, there is where everything is going to happen to him, and there is where he's going to die. So he knows that. Now, he set his face steadfastly to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers before his face, and as they went, they entered a village of Samaria. Here we're back to the Samaritan people that we talked about this morning. To prepare for him, but they did not receive him, because his face was set for the journey to Jerusalem. Here's this bitterness between these two people. Here's this bitterness in the fact that they wouldn't even receive Jesus. We don't even want him here. Don't come here to prepare a place for him, because we don't want him. Why would they feel this way? Well, Jesus was a Jew, of course. We know that just like the Samaritan woman at the well that Roger talked about this morning, when Jesus asked her of a drink of water, she said, "Why, you being a Jew, would ask that of me? Why would you be indebted to me being a Samaritan woman?" You see, the Samaritans didn't have no dealings with the Jews, and the Jews with the Samaritans. So she said, "Look, why are you come up here to ask me of this water?" Well, here are these people saying, we don't want him here. He's going to Jerusalem. Let him go on to his own people. Let him go on to his own kind. Let him go on to his own people. We don't want him here. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them just as Elijah did?" Whoa, what kind of attitude is that? Here was the Samaritan people saying, "We don't want him." They were unfairly treating Jesus, because Jesus come to be the Savior of all men. Would you not say that they were being a little bit unfair here, that they did not even want him in their town? They didn't want nothing to do with him. But look at the attitude of the disciples here. Just like Peter with Jesus, he jerked the sword. Hey, you try to take Jesus from us, we're going to fight. Wrong for wrong. Well, look at here. They said, "Here, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and to consume?" They actually wanted to burn them up. They wanted to just, hey, let's give them a Sodom and Gomorrah here. Let's give them what Isaiah give them, or Elijah here give them. And if you think about Elijah, he did do that. He did do that. They wanted to take Elijah and make him come down off the mountain. And he says in 2 Kings chapter 1, 9 through 12, "If I'm a prophet of God, let fire come down and consume you and the 50. And guess what? They got burned up. He was a prophet. He was a prophet. So here was the disciples. They wanted to, in turn, since these people did wrong here, let's make them pay for their wrong. Now, in mine and your life, how many times have we been treated wrong and we wanted to, in turn, do wrong? Now, here's how we would probably work this. Now, I want you to think about this. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Okay, I'm standing here, and somebody comes up and just takes a hammer and just smacks my thumb and just smash it flatter than a pancake. So, okay, now eye for an eye. So I'm gonna mash his thumb, but what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna mash his thumb to get even, And then I'm going to take that same hammer and I'm going to bust his big toe to teach him a lesson not to do it no more. Now, ain't that sort of the attitude that we take? Well, that's why Jesus don't want us to in turn wrong for wrong. Because we wouldn't stop just at what would be considered even. We would probably want to teach them a lesson. We would probably want to go a little bit beyond. Well, sort of like what these disciples said here. Let's just burn them up. But look what Jesus said. But he turned and rebuked them and said, you do not know what manner of spirit you are of. What kind of spirit are you? This is not the Spirit of God. This is not the Spirit of Christ. So what kind of spirit are they here? Well, in the sense that if you want to do wrong for wrong, you would have to say that they were thinking in the carnal mind, and that would be the spirit of the devil. But here's what Jesus says instead. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's life, but to save them. And they went to another village. Jesus said, look, no, we don't want to destroy these people because of that. We don't want to do this wrong because they have done us wrong. How many times in life do we want to do people wrong simply because that they have done us wrong? You see, when we're like that, we're falling into what Satan wants us to fall into. Wrong begets wrong, and wrong begets all the bitterness and the clamoring and the hatred. And the next thing you know, you're filled with so much hatred that you can't even love in a proper way. How often have we want to do that? How often have we done that? What I do is more important than how I feel at the moment. What I do is more important than how I feel at the moment. And I'm going to stop right there because I'm running out of time, and we're going to have to finish this up to this evening.